All right, let's go. Number 12, Poverty Point. In 1953, an aerial photograph of a stretch of woodland in northeastern Louisiana revealed something that shouldn't have been there. 6 concentric ridges of earth, curved into perfect C shapes, carved into the landscape on a scale that the human eye at ground level had failed to register for thousands of years. From above, the pattern was unmistakable. Someone had reshaped 910 acres of the Mississippi floodplain into a geometric statement, and they had done it before agriculture reached the continent. Poverty Point was built between approximately 1700 and 1100 BCE on the western edge of the Mississippi River Valley. The site predates the rise of the Olmec, predates the founding of Rome by nearly 1,000 years, and predates the arrival of farming in the lower Mississippi by centuries. The people who built it didn't plant crops. They didn't keep livestock. They didn't live in permanent villages in the way the textbooks define permanent. They were hunter-gatherers, and they built a monument complex that would not be matched in North America for another 2,000 years. The numbers defy comprehension. The 6 concentric ridges form a half circle, nearly 3/4 of a mile across, each ridge separated from the next by precise intervals. Each curve maintained across distances that would require deliberate planning, surveying, and centralized coordination. The earth wasn't pushed into place by machines, it was carried by hand, basket by basket, load by load. Archaeologists estimate that the construction of Mound A alone required approximately 15.5 million basket loads of soil. And here is where the standard chronology begins to fracture. Mound A appears to have been built in less than 90 days. 90 days. 15.5 million basket loads. A workforce of hunter-gatherers organized with enough precision and enough authority to mobilize and feed and direct thousands of laborers for a continuous 3-month construction sprint. No granaries, no wheat fields, no domesticated animals. Just people, baskets, and a vision of what the landscape was supposed to become. Mound A rises 72 feet above the floodplain. When viewed from above, its shape resolves into the silhouette of a bird in flight, wings extended, body oriented across the Louisiana sky. The builders did not see this view. They could not have seen it. No ladder, no scaffold, no vantage point available to a late archaic population could have lifted them high enough to confirm that their earthwork resembled, from a perspective only birds could occupy, a bird, and the artifacts found in the soil of Poverty Point have been traced to sources up to 800 miles away: copper from the Great Lakes, soapstone from the southern Appalachians, flint from the Ohio River Valley, galena from Missouri. Materials carried across half a continent by people who had no wheels, no pack animals, no draft beasts, no rivers that connected every source to the destination. A trade network of staggering geographic reach maintained by a society that wasn't supposed to exist. The orthodox model of human development is clear on this point. Monumental architecture requires agricultural surplus. Agricultural surplus requires farming. Farming requires permanent settlement. Permanent settlement precedes social hierarchy. Social hierarchy precedes the ability to organize large-scale construction. Each step builds on the last. The sequence is supposed to be inviolable. Poverty Point violates it. The people who lived along these ridges hunted deer and gathered nuts and fished the bayous. By every metric the discipline once relied on, they should have been incapable of what they accomplished. They accomplished it anyway. And then, sometime around 1100 BCE, after 6 centuries of occupation, they stopped. The ridges were left to the forest. The bird mound was left to the sky. And whatever ceremonies, whatever beliefs, whatever organizational genius had built the largest earthwork complex in the Western Hemisphere simply ended. The ridges are still there, the questions are still there, and Poverty Point is only the beginning.
Number 11.
Cahokia, the vanished metropolis. In the floodplain across the Mississippi River from modern St. Louis, beneath 6 centuries of silt and the asphalt grid of southern Illinois, lie the remains of a city that in 1250 CE was larger than London. Not a village, not a ceremonial gathering site, a city. Population estimates place the inhabitants of Cahokia at over 20,000, a density of human life that would not be matched anywhere in what is now the United States until Philadelphia surpassed it in the late 18th century. 500 years of nothing in between. A metropolis bloomed in the American Midwest, sustained itself for generations, and then was gone. The physical footprint is staggering. 120 earthen mounds rose from the floodplain, arranged in plazas and processional alignments that suggest centralized planning on a scale that pre-Columbian North America was not supposed to be capable of. At the center stood Monk's Mound, the largest pre-Columbian earthwork in the Americas, 100 feet tall, a base covering 14 acres, a footprint larger than the Great Pyramid of Giza. Built not from quarried stone, but from baskets of earth carried up its slopes one load at a time by human hands. The labor required is incomprehensible. The organization required to direct that labor is harder to explain still. To the west of Monk's Mound, the people of Cahokia raised something stranger. A circle of massive wooden posts, set into the earth in a precise ring, calibrated to track the movement of the sun across the year. Archaeologists call it Woodhenge. The posts marked the solstices and the equinoxes with the kind of precision that requires generations of observation and a stable astronomical tradition to maintain. Whoever ran Cahokia knew the sky. They had been watching it long enough to build a calendar from timber and shadow. But here's where Cahokia becomes genuinely disturbing. In the 1960s, archaeologists excavating a low ridge designated Mound 72 began pulling bodies from the earth. Not a few, not a family burial. Over 270 individuals, layered and arranged in patterns that did not resemble ordinary mortuary practice. Some were laid out with grave goods and ceremony. Others had been thrown into pits. Young women, dozens at a time, interred in mass graves. Men with their hands bound and their heads severed. The evidence of human sacrifice at Cahokia is not subtle or speculative. It is written into the bones and postures, in cut marks, in the demographic skew of the dead. Whatever rituals required that many human lives in a single mound were not occasional. They were structural. Sacrifice was infrastructure. And then, by 1350 CE, the city was empty, not destroyed by invasion, not buried by volcanic ash or swept away by flood. The population of Cahokia, 20,000 people, the planners and farmers and astronomers and priests and whoever it was that filled Mound 72 with bodies, simply walked away. The plazas emptied. The wooden posts of the solar calendar rotted in place. The great houses atop Monk's Mound fell to ruin. Within a century of its peak, the largest city north of Mexico had become a field of grass-covered hills, and the people who built it had dispersed into a continent that would, when European chroniclers arrived 200 years later, retain no memory of what had stood there. Climate change, soil exhaustion, political collapse, disease, each has been proposed. None of them fully explains a coordinated abandonment on this scale. A city the size of medieval London does not quietly evaporate, and yet Cahokia did. The mounds remain, in the flat Illinois air, holding their silence above the bones.
Number 10.
Serpent Mound's impossible geometry. In the rolling farmland of Adams County, Ohio, a serpent made of earth winds across a plateau for 1,348 feet. It has no head in the conventional sense, only an open oval, as if the snake is in the act of swallowing an egg. From the ground, it reads as a low ridge of grass, a soft undulation in the soil that a distracted hiker might mistake for a natural feature. From the air, it is unmistakable. A reptile coiled across the landscape in 7 precise curves, jaws stretched wide around something the builders never bothered to explain. The plateau itself is the first impossibility. In the 1990s, geologists confirmed that the ridge on which Serpent Mound rests sits on the rim of an ancient meteorite impact crater, a structure roughly 300 million years old, gouged into the bedrock long before anything with a backbone walked the continent. The builders of the mound did not know this in any scientific sense. They could not have. And yet they chose this exact disturbed ground, this anomaly in the geology of Ohio, to lay down the largest serpent effigy on Earth. The coincidence has never been explained. It has only been noted, quietly, in the literature, as if no one quite knows what to do with it. The dating is its own problem. Radiocarbon estimates have placed the mound's construction anywhere from 300 BCE to 1100 CE, a span of 1400 years. 2 entirely different cultures, separated by more than a millennium, are candidates for its construction. Archaeologists cannot agree on which. The serpent refuses to settle into a single chapter of the human story. But here's where the standard explanations fail entirely. The coils align with the sky. The oval head points toward the setting sun on the summer solstice. The successive curves of the body track the sunrise on the equinoxes and the winter solstice. The serpent is not a decoration laid across a hillside. It is an instrument. A 1,348-foot calendar carved in soil, oriented with a precision that requires sustained generational observation of the sky, executed by people who left no written record of having done so. And inside the Serpent, there is nothing. No burials. No grave goods. No caches of tools or pottery. No bones of the honored dead. Every other major earthwork in the eastern United States contains something. A chamber, an offering, a body, an indication of human use. Serpent Mound contains only its own shape. Whatever it was built for, the builders did not need to fill it with the dead or the precious. The form itself was the purpose. What makes this particularly unsettling is the convergence. A meteorite scar in the bedrock, an astronomical calendar in the soil, a mythological figure, the snake devouring the egg, that recurs in cosmologies on every inhabited continent. All of it stacked on a single ridge in Ohio, built by people whose identity remains contested, for reasons that have never been recovered. The Serpent is still there. You can walk its length on a paved path on a Tuesday afternoon in spring, past school groups and bird watchers, and feel nothing at all unusual underfoot. Only from above does the shape resolve. Only at the solstice does the alignment activate. The builders are gone. The crater beneath them is older than mammals, and the snake, jaws open around its egg, has been waiting on the rim of an ancient wound in the earth for at least 1,000 years.
Number 9.
Chaco Canyon's lunar architecture. In the high desert of northwestern New Mexico, in a sun-blasted canyon where modern visitors struggle to find shade, the ancestral Puebloans built something that should not have been possible. Beginning around 850 CE, in a landscape where the soil is too thin for sustained agriculture and the rainfall too sparse to support a city, they raised stone buildings that would remain the largest structures in what is now the United States until the steel skyscrapers of the late 19th century. The largest of them is called Pueblo Bonito, over 600 rooms. Multi-story great houses arranged in a vast D-shaped complex, with sandstone walls rising 5 stories tall against the Red Canyon cliffs. Circular kivas sunken into the ground, some large enough to hold hundreds of people. Doorways aligned with such precision that the morning light passes through them in geometric sequence. The masonry is layered, veneered, and finished to a standard that European cathedrals would not match for centuries. But the buildings are only the first impossibility. The trees used to construct the roofs and floors of Pueblo Bonito and its neighboring great houses came from forested mountain ranges over 50 miles away. Ponderosa pine, spruce, and fir harvested at elevation and somehow moved across 50 miles of waterless desert to the canyon floor, without wheels, without pack animals, without horses, which would not arrive in North America for another 6 centuries. An estimated 200,000 timbers were transported this way, each one carried by hand across terrain that kills modern hikers every summer. Then there are the roads, perfectly straight roads, 30 feet wide in places, cut and graded across the desert in arrow straight lines that extend hundreds of miles outward from the canyon. They do not curve to accommodate terrain. They do not deviate around obstacles. They climb cliffs using carved staircases rather than turn aside. They lead to outlying great houses, to ceremonial sites, and in some cases to nothing at all that survives in the modern landscape. Whoever designed them was not navigating. They were declaring something. Direction itself appears to have carried meaning the builders never wrote down. And then there is the sky. The buildings of Chaco Canyon align with the lunar standstill, an astronomical event that occurs every 18.6 years. During the standstill, the moon rises and sets at its most extreme northern and southern points on the horizon. Tracking this cycle requires generations of observation. A single human lifespan barely covers 4 standstills. To recognize the pattern, to encode it into stone, to orient massive buildings to its rhythm, requires a continuous astronomical tradition spanning centuries, maintained without writing, without instruments, without anything modern science would recognize as a research program. The Chacoans did it anyway. The alignments are precise to within fractions of a degree. But here's where the standard explanation falls apart. Chaco Canyon could not support the population its architecture implies. The soils are poor. The water sources are seasonal. Archaeological surveys of the canyon floor consistently find too few hearths, too few middens, too few of the daily traces a city of this scale should leave behind. The great houses appear designed for tens of thousands of people who were not actually living in them. Researchers now believe Chaco was not a city at all, but a ceremonial center, a destination. a stage. Pilgrims walked the impossible roads to reach it. They gathered beneath walls aligned to a cycle longer than a human life. They performed something inside those 600 rooms, and then, sometime in the 12th century, they stopped coming. The great houses were sealed. The roads went quiet. The astronomical knowledge that had built the canyon walked out of it and did not return.
Number 8.
The Mystery Hill Complex, and the question no one can answer. In the rolling hills of southeastern New Hampshire, about 40 miles north of Boston, a 30-acre tangle of stone chambers, walls, and standing megaliths sits in a forest that has been growing back for centuries. The site is called Mystery Hill, sometimes marketed as America's Stonehenge, a name that overpromises and underexplains in equal measure. What stands there is stranger than the name suggests. Low granite chambers with corbelled ceilings, the kind of dry stone roofing technique that requires understanding how to balance massive slabs against their own weight. Burrow into the hillside in a labyrinth of passages a grown adult has to stoop to enter. Standing stones up to 8 feet tall punctuate the surrounding woods. Walls run in directions that don't match any colonial property line. Moss has been working on the granite for so long that the stones look like they grew out of the ground rather than being placed there. Some of those stones align with the solstices. Others align with the equinoxes. Still, others align with the rising and setting positions of stars that mattered to ancient skywatchers, but mean nothing to modern property surveyors. Radiocarbon dates pulled from charcoal at the site push human activity back as far as 4,000 years. And at the center of the complex sits a 4.5-ton slab of grooved stone that researchers have labeled, with varying degrees of seriousness, the sacrificial table. The grooves channel toward a spout. Whatever liquid was meant to flow across that surface was meant to be collected. But here's where the entire framework of American prehistory starts to wobble. No one agrees on who built it. Read that sentence again. Not no one agrees on when. Not no one agrees on why. No one agrees on who. The candidate list is so wide it accidentally describes the problem with this entire continent's deep past. Some researchers attribute Mystery Hill to indigenous peoples, whose ceremonial architecture we have systematically underestimated. Others have proposed Phoenician traders crossing the Atlantic millennia before such a crossing was considered possible. Others have proposed Celtic monks fleeing the collapse of the old European world. Others, perhaps most deflatingly, have proposed colonial-era farmers stacking field stones into chambers for root storage and then forgetting they did it. Each theory has its adherents. Each theory has its problems. None of them fully accounts for the corbelled chambers, the astronomical alignments, the 4,000-year carbon dates, and the 4.5-ton grooved slab simultaneously. The site refuses to belong to anyone. What makes Mystery Hill particularly destabilizing isn't the strangeness of the stones. It's what the disagreement reveals about everything else. If a 30-acre stone complex sitting 40 miles from Boston, in one of the most heavily surveyed regions of North America, in a state with paved roads running past its entrance, cannot be confidently attributed to any known culture, then the assumption that we know who built the other sites in this list is itself a kind of inherited confidence. A consensus. A guess that calcified into a fact because no one kept asking. Every entry that follows depends on an attribution. The Hohokam built Casa Grande. The Hopewell built Newark. The Calusa built Mound Key. The Mississippians built Cahokia. These are the labels archaeology has fastened to monuments whose builders left no written language, no signed inscription, no documentary trail. The labels are useful. They are also, in some cases, placeholders for our ignorance. Mystery Hill is the site that admits this out loud. It sits there in the New Hampshire woods, 4,000 years of carbon in its soil, 8-foot megaliths casting shadows on the solstice, a 4.5-ton stone bleeding nothing into its carved channels, and it refuses to tell us whose hands shaped it. The chambers are still there. The alignments still work. The grooved slab still catches the rain, and the people who built it, whoever they were, walked out of the forest and never came back to explain.
Number 7.
Watson Brake rewrites the timeline. In 1981, a forestry worker walking a stand of timber in northern Louisiana noticed something the trees had been hiding. Low ridges of earth curved through the underbrush in a shape that was too regular to be natural. The site he reported sat on private land in Ouachita Parish. It had never appeared in any archaeological survey. No one in the surrounding community knew it was there. The forest had grown over it so completely that the oldest monumental complex in North America had been standing in plain sight, unrecorded, for the entire history of American archaeology. The site is called Watson Break. 11 earthen mounds connected by low ridges, arranged in an oval roughly 900 feet across. The mounds range from 3 feet tall at the smallest to 25 feet at the largest. The ridges between them form a continuous loop, binding the 11 structures into a single deliberate design. Standing inside the oval, a visitor is enclosed by a geometry built by human hands. Then radiocarbon dating arrived, and the timeline of American prehistory cracked. Watson Break was built around 3500 BCE. That date is not a typo. The complex predates the Great Pyramid of Giza by nearly 2,000 years. It predates Stonehenge by almost a millennium. It predates the construction of the first Mesopotamian ziggurats. When the builders of Watson Break were hauling baskets of soil into position in the Louisiana lowlands, the Egyptian civilization that would eventually raise the pyramids did not yet exist in any recognizable form. But here's where the standard model of human development collapses entirely. The people who built Watson Break were not farmers. They had no agriculture. They grew no grain. They kept no domesticated animals beyond perhaps the dog. They were hunter-gatherers, the kind of population that every 20th century textbook insisted was incapable of monumental construction. The entire architecture of mainstream archaeology rested on a simple assumption. Agriculture produces surplus. Surplus produces leisure. Leisure produces monuments. Without farms, no pyramids. Without pyramids, no civilization. Watson Break violates every step of that sequence. The builders fished, hunted, and gathered wild plants from the surrounding wetlands. They followed seasonal rounds. They lived in what the textbooks would have called a pre-civilizational mode, and they spent generations moving earth in coordinated, planned, geometrically deliberate construction. The site was used continuously for approximately 500 years. Then the builders walked away. The mounds were abandoned around 3000 BCE for reasons that have left no trace in the archaeological record. No destruction layer. No mass burial. No climatic event identified with certainty. The community that had maintained the complex for 20 generations simply stopped, and the forest began the long work of swallowing what they left behind. The implications are staggering. For more than a century, American archaeology operated with a timeline that placed serious monumental construction in the late Archaic at the earliest, built by populations on the cusp of agriculture. Watson Break pushed that boundary back 2,000 years and removed agriculture from the equation entirely. Every textbook had to be rewritten. Every assumption about what hunter-gatherers were capable of had to be reconsidered. And the most disturbing question is the one no one can answer. If the oldest mound complex in North America was unknown to science until a forestry worker stumbled across it in 1981, what else is still out there, hidden beneath the trees, older than the pyramids, waiting for someone to look in the right direction?
Number 6.
The Bighorn Medicine Wheel and the builders no one remembers. At 642 feet of elevation in the Bighorn Mountains of north-central Wyoming, above the tree line where the air thins and the wind never fully stops, a circle of flat white limestone stones rests on alpine tundra. The wheel is 80 feet across. 28 spokes radiate from a central cairn to a rim studded with smaller stone piles. 6 of those rim cairns align with the rising and setting sun on the summer solstice and with the first appearance of key stars, Aldebaran, Rigel, Sirius, at dawn during the brief weeks when the site is even accessible. The rest of the year, it lies buried under snow. The wheel has been there, exposed to that wind, for somewhere between 300 and 800 years, possibly longer. The site itself may have been used for millennia. The number of spokes is not random. 28 matches the lunar cycle. It also matches the number of rafters in a traditional plains medicine lodge, the number of days in a ceremonial month, the number of ribs on a bison. The alignments are precise enough that they cannot be coincidence. Someone stood on that ridge, calculated where the solstice sun would break the horizon, and placed stones with the patience of an astronomer working without instruments. They did this at an elevation where altitude sickness sets in within hours, where summer lasts barely 2 months, where no one could have lived year-round. The numbers describe what is there. They do not describe who put it there. But here is where the story becomes genuinely unsettling. The Bighorn Medicine Wheel is sacred to multiple indigenous nations. The Crow, the Cheyenne, The Arapaho, the Shoshone, the Lakota, the Blackfeet, all consider it a place of profound spiritual significance. Ceremonies are still conducted at the site. Offerings are still left tied to the wooden fence that now surrounds it. The wheel is not abandoned. It is actively venerated, and none of these nations claim to have built it. The oral traditions describe the wheel as already ancient when their ancestors first encountered it. The phrase that recurs across tribal accounts, in various forms, is essentially the same. It was here when we arrived. Some traditions attribute the construction to the people who came before. Others describe it as a gift from the Creator, placed on the mountain at the beginning of the world. None claim authorship. None pass down the name of an architect, a clan, a generation that did the work. This is what makes the wheel different from every other site in this list. The builders of Poverty Point left descendants who remembered the mounds. The builders of Cahokia left descendants who remembered the city even after they abandoned it. The Bighorn Medicine Wheel has no claimants. The people who knelt on that frozen ridge, who hauled limestone to 9,642 feet, who aligned 28 spokes with the moon and the solstice and the stars, they are gone. Not just gone from the earth, gone from memory. The wheel remains. The wind moves over it. The stars it was built to track continue to rise on the precise days its rim cairns were positioned to mark, and no one alive on the continent can tell you whose hands placed the stones.
Number 5.
The Miami Circle beneath the city. In September of 1998, a routine demolition at the mouth of the Miami River cleared an aging apartment complex to make way for a luxury high-rise. The construction was standard. The site was prime real estate, the kind of waterfront parcel that developers fight over for decades. What the crews found beneath the foundation slab stopped the project entirely and forced the state of Florida to spend $27 million to buy the lot before the bulldozers could return. Cut into the oolitic limestone bedrock, just below the soil of downtown Miami, was a perfect circle 38 feet across. 24 large basins had been hollowed into the stone at regular intervals around the perimeter. Hundreds of smaller post holes surrounded them in a pattern too precise to be accidental. The geometry was clean, the spacing deliberate, the execution flawless. Whoever made this had measured. Whoever made this had planned. And whoever made this had done it by carving directly into solid bedrock with tools that should not have existed in their hands. Radiocarbon dating placed the circle at between 15,700 and 2,000 years old. Archaeologists attributed the work to the Tequesta, the indigenous people who occupied the southern tip of the Florida peninsula at the time of European contact. The attribution was logical. The Tequesta were the population in the area. The geography matched. The dating aligned. But here's where the standard explanation falls apart. The Tequesta did not carve stone. They did not build permanent structures. Every archaeological record of their material culture describes a people who lived lightly on the land, who fished and gathered along the coast, who left behind shell middens and bone tools and very little else. They are not recorded anywhere in the literature as masons. They are not recorded anywhere as engineers. They are not recorded anywhere as builders of geometric monuments aligned to anything. And yet the circle exists. It exists in downtown Miami. It exists carved into bedrock harder than the tools the Tequesta are supposed to have. Possessed. The contents of the basins deepened the strangeness. Inside the holes, excavators recovered polished stone axe heads sourced from material that does not occur naturally within hundreds of miles of the Florida coast. They found shark teeth arranged in deliberate placements. In one basin, they found the complete articulated skeleton of a shark laid into the stone as if interred. These were not casual deposits. These were offerings, placed with intent, by people performing a ritual whose meaning died with them. The truly disturbing aspect is what the circle implies about the silence that surrounds it. If the Tequesta built it, then we have fundamentally misunderstood who the Tequesta were, what they were capable of, and what knowledge they carried. If they did not build it, then someone else was here 2,000 years ago, on a riverbank that is now buried beneath a city of 400,000 people, cutting geometry into stone for reasons no one ever recorded. The Miami Circle still sits where it was found, preserved beneath a park at the river's edge. Skyscrapers rise around it. Traffic crosses bridges above it. Cruise ships pass within sight of it. And the precise pattern, carved into the limestone, continues to ask a question that the city built on top of it has never been able to answer.
Number 4.
Mound Key, a city made of shells. In southwestern Florida, in the shallow estuary waters of Estero Bay, there is an island that should not exist. No river deposited it. No tectonic uplift raised it. No coral reef built it from below. The island was built by hand, shell by shell, over centuries, by a people who never planted a single crop. It is called Mound Key, and it was the capital of the Cahokia Kingdom. The island rises 32 feet above sea level, in a region where natural land barely exists. The surrounding mangrove flats and tidal channels are inches above the waterline at best, vulnerable to every storm surge the Gulf delivers. Mound Key is different. Mound Key was engineered. The entire landmass, every cubic foot of it, is constructed from billions of discarded seashells, layered and compacted over generations into ridges and plateaus, solid enough to support a city. The Cahokia did not farm. They did not plant maize, beans, or squash. They did not domesticate animals. By every standard model of how complex societies are supposed to emerge, the Cahokia should never have existed. Agriculture is the prerequisite. Agriculture produces the food surplus that frees labor for construction, that supports specialists, that enables kings and priests and engineers. The Cahokia skipped that step entirely. They built their civilization on fish. The estuaries of southwest Florida were so productive that the Cahokia extracted everything they needed from the water. Fish, shellfish, manatee, sea turtle. The surplus was so reliable that it functioned the way agricultural surplus functions elsewhere. It freed thousands of people from the daily search for food, and those people built an island. At its peak, Mound Key featured a system of canals cut through the shell terrain, water courts engineered for holding live fish, and a central structure described by 16th century Spanish accounts as a king's house, large enough to hold 2,000 people, inside a single building, on an island made of mollusk shells. The Spanish who encountered the Cahokia Kingdom in the 1500s recorded a society with a paramount ruler, a standing military, tribute networks extending across southern Florida, and ceremonial complexity that rivaled the agricultural civilizations to the north and west. The shell ridges and plateaus are still there today, white beneath the tropical vegetation that has reclaimed them, the engineered water channels still visible from above when the light catches the geometry just right. From the air, the outlines of the canals trace the deliberate intentions of a vanished engineering tradition through what looks, at ground level, like undifferentiated jungle. What makes Mound Key particularly disturbing is what it does to the foundational story of human civilization. The standard narrative holds that complexity follows agriculture, that the surplus from grain enables the priest, the king, the architect, the army. Mound Key is a 32-foot-high refutation. A kingdom rose from the water without a single planted field. A capital city was constructed from the refuse of meals. A population of thousands organized itself around tides and nets instead of furrows and seeds, and built something that lasted long enough for European ships to find it and write it down. The Cahokia are gone. The island remains.
Number 3.
The Newark earthworks, geometry from a world without geometry. In central Ohio, beneath the streets of a modern town that shares its name, lies one of the most precisely engineered ancient landscapes on Earth. The Newark earthworks were built by the Hopewell culture between roughly 100 BCE and 500 CE. At their maximum extent, they covered more than 4 square miles of geometric forms, circles, squares, octagons, and connecting avenues laid out across the Ohio Valley with a precision that should not have been possible. The Great Circle alone is 200 feet in diameter. Its earthen wall, 8 to 14 feet high, encloses a near-perfect circle whose deviation from true geometry is measured in inches across nearly a quarter-mile of construction. Beside it stands the octagon, an 8-sided enclosure so large that 4 Roman colosseums could fit inside it with room to spare. The two shapes are connected by parallel earthen walls running for thousands of feet. From the ground, they read as low grassy ridges. From the air, they resolve into something else entirely. A vast, deliberate geometry inscribed on the landscape by a people the textbooks describe as preliterate. In 1982, 2 researchers from Earlham College, Ray Hively and Robert Horn, surveyed the octagon with modern instruments and found something that has unsettled archaeoastronomers ever since. The walls of the octagon align with the rising and setting positions of the moon at its 18.6-year lunar standstill. Not approximately, precisely. 4 of the 8 major lunar alignments fall within the structure's geometry, with an accuracy that rivals modern surveying. The 18. 6-year lunar standstill is not a phenomenon that announces itself. It is a slow, almost imperceptible oscillation in the moon's rising and setting points along the horizon, completing one full cycle roughly every 19 years. To detect it, you must observe the moon over decades. To map it, you must keep records across generations. To build a monument that encodes it, you must integrate multi-generational astronomical observation into permanent architecture. The Hopewell did this without metal tools, without the wheel, without written mathematics, without any documented system of measurement we can identify. They moved millions of cubic feet of earth using digging sticks, woven baskets, and human shoulders. They surveyed across distances and elevations that should have introduced cumulative error at every stage. The error did not accumulate. The circle remained circular. The octagon's angles held true. The lunar geometry locked into place across a footprint larger than most modern downtowns. What makes this particularly disturbing is what the precision implies. Geometry of this caliber requires standardized units. Standardized units require institutions to maintain them. Institutional astronomy requires record-keeping across human lifespans, none of which the Hopewell are supposed to have possessed. The conventional model of their society describes scattered villages, seasonal gatherings, and a culture that left no writing behind. Yet the earthworks at Newark required something a society of scattered villages should not have been able to produce: a sustained, multi-generational scientific project. The Hopewell culture dissolved by around 500 CE. The people who designed the octagon, who tracked the moon across 2 decades to align a wall with its northernmost rise, who walked the parallel avenues between the great circles and the geometric enclosures. They left no names, no inscriptions, no oral traditions that survived intact. What remains is the geometry itself, still grass-covered, still precise, still pointing at a moon that continues its 18.6-year drift across a sky the builders read more carefully than we did. Number 2. Casa Grande's solar hole. In 1694, the Jesuit missionary Eusebio Kino crossed into the Sonoran Desert of what is now southern Arizona and recorded the first European description of a structure that should not have been standing. A 4-story earthen tower rising out of flat desert, its walls baked hard as stone, its rooms empty, its purpose unknown. Kino called it Casa Grande, the Great House. The name stuck because no one could think of anything better to call it. 3 centuries later, we still cannot. The building was raised around 1350 CE by the Hohokam, a culture that had occupied the Sonoran lowlands for over 1,000 years. They built it from caliche, a calcium carbonate mud that hardens into something approaching natural concrete. The walls are 4 feet thick at the base. They have stood through 700 years of monsoon, flash flood, and desert sun without collapsing. No mortar, no stone facing, no fascian in the modern sense. Just packed mud engineered with such precision that it has outlasted most of the wooden structures built in North America since. The Hohokam who raised it were not isolated primitives. They were the most sophisticated hydraulic engineers in pre-Columbian North America. The canal system surrounding Casa Grande extends for hundreds of miles, drawing water from the Gila and Salt rivers through gravity-fed channels carved across desert terrain with grades so precise that water moved exactly where it needed to go and nowhere it didn't. Some of those canals are still traceable today. Some were reused by Phoenix's modern irrigation system. The people who built Casa Grande knew how to move water across a landscape that wanted to kill them. They understood slope, flow, and engineering tolerance in ways that took European settlers another 5 centuries to match. But here's where the standard explanation falls apart. In the upper wall of Casa Grande, there is a single small circular hole cut through the caliche with deliberate care. On the morning of the spring equinox, sunlight passes through that hole and strikes a precise interior surface. The alignment is exact. It is not decorative. It is not accidental. Someone designed Casa Grande as an astronomical instrument and then, almost immediately after completing it, walked away. The Hohokam abandoned Casa Grande within a generation of finishing it. Within another century, the entire Hohokam culture had vanished from the archaeological record. The canals went dry. The villages emptied. The population that had engineered one of the most sophisticated water systems in the Americas simply ceased to exist as an identifiable people. No invasion, no conquest, no clear catastrophe. They were there, and then they were gone, and the 4-story tower they were raised at the end of their civilization was left standing in the empty desert with sunlight still passing through a hole in its wall every spring. Today, Casa Grande sits beneath a massive steel canopy erected in 1932 to protect it from the elements. The tan walls rise from the desert flatlands exactly as Kino described them, sheltered now by a roof built by the civilization that replaced the one that vanished. The equinox light still finds its mark. No one alive knows what it was meant to illuminate. Number 1. The effigy mounds and the shapes that outlived their meaning. Across the upper Midwest, in the river valleys of Wisconsin, Iowa, Minnesota, and Illinois, thousands of earthen mounds rise from the soil in the shapes of animals: bears, birds, panthers, long-tailed water spirits. Human figures with outstretched arms. They were built between roughly 700 and 1200 CE by a culture archaeologists called the Effigy mound builders, and they represent one of the most concentrated displays of monumental animal art in the prehistoric world. The highest concentration sits in Wisconsin, where the soft, grassy contours of bears and birds still ripple across the landscape, often clustered along rivers and lakes, as if the builders chose their canvases by the sound of moving water. The scale is difficult to absorb from the ground. Some bird-shaped mounds have wingspans exceeding 600 feet. 2 football fields, tip to tip, sculpted in earth. From standing height, they read as gentle swells in the terrain. From the air, they resolve into recognizable creatures with deliberate anatomy: wings, legs, tails, snouts. The builders engineered them to be seen from a vantage point they themselves could not occupy. But here is where the mystery becomes something quieter and stranger than any other site on this list. Many of these mounds contain no burials, no artifacts, no evidence of ceremonial fire, no grave goods, no bones. They were not tombs. They were not, in any conventional sense, monuments to the dead. Archaeologists have excavated effigy after effigy and found nothing inside but undisturbed soil, carefully placed, carefully shaped, and carefully left alone. The implications are difficult to sit with. Whatever these shapes meant, the meaning was not stored in objects. It was stored in the shapes themselves, in the bear's posture, in the bird's wingspan. In the panther's tail trailing along a ridge above a river, the information was the form, and the form was meant to last. It did. The builders did not. Sometime after 1200 CE, the effigy mound culture vanished. Not gradually. Not through documented migration or absorption into a successor civilization. The building simply stopped. The communities that had spent 5 centuries shaping animals into the earth dispersed, or transformed, or were lost, and they took the meaning of their work with them. No oral tradition fully explains the choices. No surviving culture claims authorship of the specific designs. The descendants of the region's indigenous peoples acknowledge the mounds as sacred and ancestral, but the precise symbolism, the reason this animal here and that animal there, the logic that placed a 600-foot bird along one bluff and a long-tailed water spirit along another, is gone. We are left with the shapes. Soft grassy contours pressing up from the soil in the form of creatures whose significance has been completely erased. A bear, mid-step, on a hillside above the Wisconsin River. A bird with wings the length of a city block, asleep in a meadow. A panther stretched along a ridge, watching nothing, meaning nothing that anyone alive can name. They will still be there tomorrow. They will still be there in 1,000 years, slowly softening into the landscape, slowly forgetting themselves further, and we will still not know why they were made. If you want to see more videos like this, click the video on screen now and make sure to subscribe.